As the pandemic ravaged economies earlier this year, global companies were bleeding billions, and it was not just due to shutdowns. Movements in the currency markets cost North American and European companies $17.5 billion in the second quarter, and that was up 44% from the March period. The numbers from a quarterly currency impact report from risk management firm Kyriba. Wolfgang Koester is their senior strategist, and he joins us now. So, Wolfgang, some profound moves in currencies having some profound impacts on a number of companies. Which companies were the worst hit?
Well, I mean, some of those were, for example, an Anheuser-Busch or a Pirelli or a Apple, quite frankly. So those are big names, and materiality really should be anything that's more than 10, 15 basis points or 0.1, 0.2%. These companies were all north of 3. And in the case of Apple, about 7% hit. So $1.8 billion hit due to foreign exchange exposures and the management. And it wasn't just because of the movement, but also what you saw at the beginning of the pandemic is a lot of companies bringing their outside cash back into their home currency. So Apple, I'm sure, went out and got a bunch of dollars, euros, et cetera, back into the dollar, but they didn't have the visibility to actually see what they did to risk. So if you have accounts payable in a country and you took the cash out, you actually created more risk. So that $17.5 billion number is actually probably the biggest impact given the revenue reduction that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic and continued to some degree. Luckily, we're now recovering. Probably the biggest number we've ever seen, and it points to the fact that there's still lots of companies who are not leveraging technology to understand their liquidity and have visibility and then act accordingly.
So let's talk about some of those companies that weren't so badly impacted. Is it because they employed strategies that you describe, or was it just from a pure lack of exposure to some of these gyrations?
No, actually, the majority of them is you look at the Nortons and the Foot Lookers and the Greggers of the world. I mean, Greggers is a $2.8 billion revenue company. They are a producer of automotive parts, for example, right? And they had a $2.8 billion for the quarter, so $11 billion company. They had no impact, and it's not because they didn't have the exposure. All these companies, you look at an S&P 500 company, sorry, I know I'm talking to Asia as well. You look at even the Hong Kong market, you see a company that's over $500 million in revenues. They're going to be at least in 20 countries. They're not just going to be home currency. Even if you look at grocery stores, they still source from outside. So this is all about having visibility to the cash and to their risk and leveraging technologies to do so.
So which currencies were the most impactful for these companies then?
Well, you certainly had the euro, you had the Brazilian real. For the U.S. companies, those are some of the currencies that were impacting. But I think it's more about what actually these companies didn't do, because what they actually did just blindly in March and April, bring as much cash back as possible and lost visibility towards what that actually was from an impact point of view. And they didn't manage liquidity the way companies should.
And of course, we have seen a historically strong Chinese yuan. This GTV chart for our viewers just showing the volatility as well. The 1 month really at the highest level since March already. How impactful was this strength? And also, what are you watching out for in the next 2 weeks as we have really a lot happening in China, including the plenum, not to mention the anti-IPO?
Yeah, so we can talk about the Alibaba and Ant in a second here. First thing I'm looking for is I'm a little bit troubled by, hopefully not the misconception that we're not about to hit a very volatile spot. I actually feel we are. With the known knowns are certainly, or the unknown knowns, is the U.S. election, certainly November 4th. Are we really going to have results on that day or not? Quite likely that we're not. Second of all, COVID continues. Okay, that's known. And then comes something that hasn't been looked in the market very much, which in Asia should be and is, I'm sure, watched already, which is Singles Day. And really, there's an opportunity for the Chinese government to actually issue their electronic currency. And that's going to have all sorts of impacts and certainly volatility, because if that happens, It will show the world that the Chinese are first to go after this market. And it'll also review people as investors to look at, well, is Alibaba then properly priced, or is now the Chinese government going to actually take over part of that business, which is another thing when you're looking at the IPO, which is coming on November 4th. So there's actually a lot more going on, a lot more undercurrent, and the recommendation is to make sure that you're really prepared for what this is going to come up with. These corporations that I'm talking to, when I'm talking to now CEOs and CFOs, they're saying, what do I do? Is first of all, you need to make sure that you're fully digitalized. That means you need to have automated processes, because if you're all of a sudden going to electronic currency, you do not have 2 days to settle that. You need immediate visibility, and you're going to be exchanging it immediately. And the companies that are not ready for this are going to have a competitive, serious disadvantage. And a lot of companies are pushing really hard to get digitalized as soon as possible in the entire CFO suite.
Okay, so you're watching closely for a digital yuan. What's it going to mean for the greenback and for the euro?
Well, I actually think, and I've been saying this for a while, that's actually threatening what the ruling currency of the world is going to be. And it's taken these sort of seismic shifts that have moved away from, for example, the sterling many years ago. Before that, the Portuguese were ruled. Before that, the Romans. So there were major changes that actually changed what became the world currency. And it could be an opportunity. The Europeans are thinking about doing it. The Americans are planning on doing it. The Chinese have already tested it twice, as you well know. Last test being a couple of weeks ago with the raising of the $1.5 million, give it to 30 people, and doing that. So they're in testing mode of what they've already built, and which, by the way, as a question, and I've had people ask this question, is what does that mean for Ant? If they're going public at that, what is estimated to be the largest IPO valuation right after Aramco, it's a real issue. And that is something that investors also need to take into consideration.
Wolfgang, it was great having your thoughts. Thank you so much. Wolfgang Koester, Kyriba Senior Strategist.